Memphis turned its back on its own son. Moneybagg Yo, a man who built his entire career off the culture of that city, got the door slammed in his face before he could even hit the stage. He hopped on Facebook and set the record straight immediately. He never walked away from anything. FedEx Forum made that call, not him. And this wasn't a cheap operation either. $300,000 was already locked in. The guests were confirmed. The production was set. He said it left him genuinely crushed inside. Now sit with that for a minute, because people are missing the real weight of the situation. This has nothing to do with venue logistics, nothing to do with dates not lining up. What actually happened is a rapper got blocked from performing in the place that raised him, the same place he's been repping since day one. FedEx Forum didn't bother explaining themselves. They canceled it quietly and moved on like nothing happened. Meanwhile, every other act on that arena's calendar got to show up and do their thing. Gospel acts, rock legends, professional wrestling, all of it went on without any issues, but the biggest name Memphis rap has put out in recent memory couldn't even get a shot at a homecoming. No explanation, no conversation, just silence. And that silence says everything. The real question isn't simply why FedEx Forum pulled the plug. The deeper question is what exactly makes Moneybagg Yo performing in Memphis such a problem that a $300,000 production gets scrapped without a single public word of explanation. And to get to that answer, you have to go all the way back to South Memphis. A $200,000 record deal, 6 people hit by gunfire outside a club, a song recorded behind bars, an artist who isn't here anymore, a funeral he never showed up to, and a whole circle of people who are fully convinced that he owes them something no amount of money could ever settle. Buckle up, because this story has layers. You can't understand why he can't come back without first understanding what he was coming back from. And we're not talking about some generic rags to riches narrative people slap on every rapper from a rough area. We're talking about something specific. Walker Homes, South Memphis, Harravine Street, one of the most notorious project streets in all of Tennessee. Demario Dwayne White Jr., born September 22, 1991, grew up deep inside that world. Single mother holding down 3 kids. The kind of poverty where you're stretched out on the bare floor in the middle of summer just to catch some relief from the heat because there's no AC in sight. But here's what separated Moneybagg Yo from every other kid scraping by in Walker Homes. He came into this world as a blood cousin to Crunchy Black of 3 6 Mafia. If you have any real connection to Memphis, you already understand the gravity of that. 3 6 Mafia didn't just rep Memphis, they carried the whole city onto a global stage. That bloodline handed young Demario a level of street credibility that most people spend years trying to earn before he ever breathed a word into a microphone. Crunchy Black spoke on it himself and made it plain. That's genuinely his cousin. In a city where your name and your lineage determine how far you can move, that kind of endorsement is priceless, but that same royal connection came with expectations attached. You carry yourself a certain way, you don't waver, you don't compromise, and you absolutely do not cross lines that your people sacrificed to establish. Those unspoken rules would come back around on him in a serious way. By his early teens, South Memphis streets had become his actual education. Skipping class, rolling dice, chasing that first taste of quick money, standard for where he was from. But it was during that same stretch that he found the crew that would shape his entire trajectory, for better and for worse. Young Mob, at the core of that crew were 2 brothers, Lance Taylor, known as OG Boo Dirty, and Brian Lackland, known as Stupid Duke. These weren't just people he hung around, these were the ones who stood by him when he had absolutely nothing to his name. No floor to sleep on, no believers in his corner, his genuine day ones. OG Boo Dirty was the older brother of the 2. OG Boo Dirty already had a name in the streets long before Moneybagg ever entered the picture. Arson de No 2. Attempted second-degree murder charges. Court documents painted a picture of someone who moved with a level of violence that most people only hear about. His younger brother Stupid Duke was somehow an entirely different kind of dangerous. At just 16 years old, his reputation in Memphis streets had already outgrown his age. The paperwork would eventually catch up and confirm everything people were saying. But back then, Duke was simply Moneybagg's brother in every way that mattered. The type who showed face when things got heavy. Young Mob ran South Memphis like it was theirs because it was, and being part of that crew came with an implicit agreement that didn't need to be written down anywhere. We cover you, you carry our name, and you never, and under any circumstance, extend any loyalty toward the other side. The other side meant North Memphis, and North Memphis meant Yo Gotti. Thanksgiving weekend 2010, Level 2 nightclub, Memphis. That night drew a line between North and South that never fully disappeared, and Moneybagg found himself right in the middle of it. Level 2 was the spot back then. Rappers, street figures, hustlers from every corner of the city, all packed into one room to be seen. Yo Gotti was there flying the North Memphis flag. OG Boo Dirty was there holding it down for the South. Words got exchanged that had no business being said. And in Memphis, disrespect doesn't get filed away and forgotten. It gets addressed on sight. What opened as a verbal confrontation inside the club escalated into threats, then into something uglier. Once the doors let out and the crowd spilled into the parking lot, Level 2 became a scene. 6 people were shot that night. Court documents and witness accounts identified Lance Taylor, OG Boo Dirty, as the one who fired first and didn't stop. Moneybagg was standing right there when it happened. He witnessed the whole thing firsthand, watched his closest brother put his life and his freedom on the line standing up for South Memphis. OG Boo Dirty caught the charges and was now fighting a case that could have swallowed the rest of his years, and Moneybagg didn't just quietly support him from a distance, he made it public. He stepped in front of the camera for OG Boo Dirty's diss track aimed straight at Yo Gotti, throwing up signs repping the set without a single hesitation. Everyone in Memphis saw it. There was no reading between the lines. Yo Gotti was the opposition, Young Mob was home, and Moneybagg was planting his flag right there in the dirt with them. That's how he moved through 2010, 2011, and beyond. And that's exactly why it matters so much. Showing up in that video wasn't a casual feature. In Memphis street culture, standing next to a man who just put 6 people down over a North versus South beef is a statement that gets carved into people's memory permanently. The streets don't forget those moments, they archive them and pull them back out when things eventually unravel. He kept pushing through it all, still broke, still grinding, but his music was starting to find its footing in the Memphis underground. He dropped projects in 2011 and 2012, kept releasing, kept building a name. Then 2015 came and took one of his closest brothers, a man he called Elo. Elo had been the one in his ear during every moment he considered walking away from music altogether. After losing him, Moneybagg got his name permanently tattooed beside his eye and built an entire mixtape around his memory called Elo, Everybody Lives On. That project turned heads and eventually led to his first legitimate record deal with Endless Entertainment. Things were finally moving. Then 2016 arrived and brought with it the most defining and most controversial call Moneybagg Yo has ever made. Yo Gotti came to him not once, not twice, 3 separate times. The same man whose people had been in an active shooting war with Young Mob since that night at Level 2, the king of North Memphis himself. He wanted to bring Moneybagg into CMG, Collective Music Group, and put real money and real industry infrastructure behind his career. CMG had major label distribution. They had credible artists already on the roster, and Yo Gotti slid $200,000 across the table as a signing bonus. Let that land for a second. This is a man who grew up with the lights cut off, who slept on bare floors not that long before. $200,000 wasn't just a number, it was the first real breath of air he'd ever had. Security for his family. Every locked door finally cracking open at once. But here's the part that makes this decision nearly impossible to defend on any street level. He knew exactly what it meant, and he did it anyway. He said it himself in his own words, that he was from the South, Gotti was from the North, they didn't get along, and he went against his hood because he saw a bigger picture. He didn't get misled into anything. He sat with the weight of it, looked at both sides, and chose the 200,000. He chose CMG. He chose Yo Gotti, the exact man his day ones had nearly caught bodies over just 6 years prior. The ink dried on that contract in 2016, and Moneybagg's entire world shifted in an instant. Everything he had been flipped overnight. Young Mob Soldier became CMG artist. South Memphis became associated with North Memphis money. The brothers who had his back when he had nothing were now on the opposite side of a business relationship he chose to enter. He walked in knowing all of that. And Memphis, every corner of it, took note. Young Mob's response wasn't slow or measured. It was immediate, and it cut deep, because this wasn't a business partner feeling professionally slighted. This was family watching someone they shielded and claimed walk directly into their enemy's house and shake hands over a check. That alone would have been enough, but then Moneybagg made it worse by minimizing the entire history. In a 2017 sit-down with DJ Vlad, he told the interviewer that nobody died over any of this anyway, and that people should just move on. Memphis heard that and went cold, because that statement wasn't just wrong, it was a deliberate erasure. People had lost their lives in that ongoing North versus South tension. 6 bodies hit the pavement outside level 2. OG Boo Dirty had sacrificed years of his freedom holding that line, and now Moneybagg was sitting in front of a camera on a nationally distributed platform, acting like none of it amounted to anything worth acknowledging. That was the moment the door closed permanently. Memphis people understand someone chasing their shot. Hunger is something they know intimately, but leaving and then publicly burying the sacrifices people made for you, that's a different category of violation entirely. Young Mob made sure he understood that, not through interviews or social media. The Memphis way, quiet, direct, and with real consequences behind it. Now here's where everything starts connecting in ways that explain FedEx Forum, the Las Vegas incident, the artist who isn't here anymore, the funeral he never attended, and the reason Moneybagg has been effectively locked out of his own city for years. In 2020, audio leaked online that had been recorded from inside a prison cell. The voice belonged to Brian Lachlan, Stupid Duke, one of Moneybagg's original brothers from Young Mob. On that recording, Duke lays it out plainly. Moneybagg crossed a line that can never be walked back. He did music with the person responsible for killing one of their own. That kind of move, according to Duke, puts you on permanent smoke and no timeline, no resolution, no conversation to be had. Just forever. Let that actually register. This wasn't some anonymous account on the internet stirring things up. This was the man who knew Moneybagg before he had $1 to his name, speaking from behind bars and making it clear that what existed between them was done and the smoke had no expiration date. And Duke wasn't simply hung up on the CMG signing alone. The deeper issue was Moneybagg working alongside people who were directly connected to bloodshed against Young Mob members. In street terms, collaborating with someone who has your people's blood on their hands doesn't read as disloyalty, it reads as you actively choosing the other side. That's a distinction that carries an entirely different kind of weight. Then things shifted from personal to financial, because Young Mob didn't settle for just cutting him off. According to multiple sources close to the situation, they began applying pressure in the form of ongoing payment demands. Not a single conversation with a one-time settlement, the recurring arrangement, essentially a tax on everything Moneybagg was building. The position was straightforward and ruthless. You came up on our name, our protection, and our reputation, and now that the millions are coming in, a percentage of that belongs to us. Or you deal with what comes after refusal. Big 30, the Memphis artist Moneybagg, later brought into his Bread Gang label, confirmed the situation publicly. He said plainly that Moneybagg had come to their neighborhood specifically for the muscle because certain people had started applying serious pressure on him, and that the payments were ongoing, not past tense, not settled, but still actively happening. That wasn't rumor being passed around. That was someone with direct knowledge saying out loud what the streets had already been saying quietly. Caught between writing checks and risking his physical safety, Moneybagg chose a third path entirely. Around the same time Duke's prison audio went public in 2020, he signed Big 30, Big Nusky, and several other Memphis artists to Bread Gang. From the outside, it looked like an artist investing back into his city. According to Big 30's own account though, the music was secondary. What Moneybagg was actually building was a wall of protection around himself. Moneybagg physically went into their neighborhood and handpicked those artists himself. Not because he heard a hot verse and saw potential, because they had the kind of street credibility and willingness to step up that made them valuable as a human barrier between him and what Young Mob was bringing. That detail gets overlooked too often in how people tell this story. Here's a man clearing $200,000 a night on tour, Billboard number ones to his name, certifiably one of the biggest rappers alive, and he had to dress up a security arrangement as a record deal just to move through his own city without looking over his shoulder every 30 seconds. Sit with that. That's not strategy. That's survival wrapped in paperwork. That's a man spending whatever it takes just to stay breathing. Then September 2020 arrived and things stopped being abstract. Moneybagg was out in Las Vegas marking his 29th birthday alongside his girlfriend Ari Fletcher when shots rang out at the gathering. A woman connected to Ari took a graze wound. The official report tried to frame it as random. The streets read it as a deliberate communication, a reminder that no amount of distance or geography was going to keep him insulated. Somebody had followed him all the way to one of the most heavily surveilled cities on earth just to send a point. Distance doesn't protect you from people who are motivated enough to move around it. January 28, 2022, New Horizon River Apartments, Whitehaven, Memphis, Big Nusky, signed to Moneybagg's Bread Gang, blood cousin to Big 30, and one of the central figures in the protection arrangement, was shot and killed at 26 years old. Medics arrived and pronounced him dead on scene. The murder shook Moneybag's entire operation down to its foundation because Nusky wasn't just an artist with a deal. He was a functioning piece of the wall Moneybagg had constructed around himself, and now that wall had a hole blown through it. The message embedded in that killing was precise and intentional. It said that anyone Moneybagg positioned around himself became a target by association. His signings weren't untouchable, his money couldn't cover everyone. And if the people he was paying to stand beside him could get touched, then so could he. Most people close to the situation and throughout the music community drew a direct line between Nusky's murder and the ongoing pressure surrounding Moneybag's name. Law enforcement never laid out a public motive, but the timing and the pattern told Memphis everything it needed to know. That loss put Moneybagg in front of a defining moment. Would he show up to the funeral? Would he stand in that room and be present for someone who died within his orbit, possibly because of a beef that originated with him? He didn't go. What he offered instead was a car emoji on social media. That was the extent of his public acknowledgement, and that single decision detonated his relationship with Big 30 completely. Big 30 aired everything out publicly, pointed out that posting an emoji and actually being in that car on the way to say goodbye are two entirely different things. He said he had $150,000 in a bag, ready to make sure his cousin was laid to rest properly. He also said Moneybagg had been calling his phone trying to cover the funeral costs. Think about that dynamic. A man offering to fund arrangements for a funeral he refused to physically attend. Big 30 didn't accept, and he made his position clear for everyone to hear. You tried to buy your way into a moment that required you to actually show up. Money isn't a substitute for presence, it never will be. Now, to be fair to Moneybagg, and that fairness is important, walking into that funeral may have genuinely been one of the most dangerous things he could have done. If the people responsible for Nusky's death had anything to do with the broader beef, then that service was potentially a room full of people who held Moneybagg at least partially responsible for their loss. That's not an irrational thing to fear, that's a real calculation a man makes about whether showing his face somewhere is worth what might happen next. But in street culture, a self-preservation decision that goes unexplained reads as cowardice by default. He didn't explain, he posted a car emoji, and that image became the shorthand for every criticism people had been leveling at. That somewhere along the way, money became his first language, and loyalty got left in Walker homes. At that point, Moneybagg had lost the protection layer he was financing. While the original threat that made him build it was still very much active, he was paying multiple directions and covered by none of them, trapped in his own city by the weight of choices he made years earlier. July 2023 brought federal RICO indictments down on 15 alleged young mob members. Drug trafficking, firearms, the full package. Stupid Duke was named in those charges, and Duke's legal situation kept compounding from there. Back in May of that year, he had already caught an attempted first-degree murder charge connected to a shooting at Tug's Grill in the Harbortown area of Memphis. Court filings allege that Duke and another individual tried to rob someone. The situation deteriorated, and a man named Robert Winston ended up dead. Then by September 2024, the charges stacked even further. Attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, weapons charges during a dangerous felony, reckless endangerment, multiple counts that, combined, could permanently remove him from the street. The natural assumption might be that federal heat on Young Mob's leadership would soften the danger around Moneybagg. That assumption misunderstands how these situations actually work. When the people directing an organization get pulled into federal proceedings, the remaining members don't step back and reassess, they move more aggressively. Younger members see an opening to build their name. Honoring imprisoned leadership by continuing what they started becomes its own form of currency. Duke sitting in a cell didn't make Memphis any safer from the crowd. It potentially made the unpredictability worse because now the moves being made weren't coming from experienced hands with measured judgment. They were coming from people with something to prove and nobody above them applying brakes. The federal cases also created a separate kind of exposure for Moneybagg that had nothing to do with street consequences. Suddenly, his entire history, affiliations, come up, roots in Young Mob, the nature of those early relationships was being entered into court records and discussed in federal proceedings. People connected to the case were giving statements that filled in details about the ecosystem his career grew inside of. He was never charged in the RICO case, but being that close to federal litigation meant his every move in Memphis was sandwiched between law enforcement watching from one direction and people who felt betrayed watching from the other. September 19, 2023, FedEx Forum puts out a post stating that Moneybagg Yo's scheduled homecoming concert, set for September 30th, was being called off. Refunds would be processed at the point of purchase. No provided reason, no rescheduled date offered, just gone. The context surrounding that announcement is everything. Just 12 days earlier, on September 7, 2023, Lil Baby had performed at FedEx Forum. During that show, gunfire broke out inside the arena. One person was struck. Memphis police publicly described the shooting as premeditated and targeted, not a random discharge, not an accident, but a planned, directed act of violence carried out inside a major entertainment venue during a concert. FedEx Forum entered full crisis mode around hip-hop bookings after that night. The promotion company behind Moneybag's upcoming show was the same outfit that had handled Lil Baby's event, so when FedEx Forum started making decisions about which shows were worth the security risk, Moneybag's name surfaced first. Not Drake, not Kirk Franklin, not Stevie Nicks, not AEW, him specifically. 2 days after the cancellation announcement, Moneybagg got on Facebook and said everything. He clarified immediately that he didn't walk away from anything. FedEx Forum made that decision, not him. He said he had $300,000 already committed to production. Major artists were locked in to appear. He said it genuinely broke his heart, and that, out of everything on his entire tour schedule, the Memphis show was the one he had been looking forward to the most. He mentioned that he had done everything within his power to assure the venue that nothing was going to happen, and that his team was already searching for an alternative venue large enough to hold the vision he had. Every line of that post deserves to be unpacked. His clarification that he didn't cancel anything is accurate, all he didn't pull out. But the reason FedEx Forum made that call traces directly back to his name and everything attached to it. The venue didn't arbitrarily walk away from a paying customer. They did a risk assessment. They looked at his specific history in Memphis, the ongoing situation around him, what had just happened inside their building days before, and they concluded the liability wasn't something they were prepared to absorb. $300,000 in production costs tells you how committed he was. This wasn't a modest local show. He was building something designed to be the biggest homecoming a Memphis artist had ever staged. He wanted to come back to his city and stand on its largest platform and declare through his presence that he had made it and that it all still meant something to him. The part about his heartbreaking is the most unguarded moment in the entire statement. Out of all the cities on a 23-city run, Memphis was the one that carried the most emotional weight. He's been based in Atlanta, operating at a distance from everything that shaped him, and that concert was supposed to close a gap that no streaming number or chart position had been able to close. The line about assuring the venue that nothing would happen reveals what the actual negotiation looked like. He wasn't discussing stage logistics. He was sitting across from arena executives trying to convince them that his own beef wouldn't follow him into their building on the night of his homecoming. That is what a band looks like when it doesn't come with formal documentation. There's no letter, there's no press release making the declaration official. It looks like a venue going quiet and canceling without explanation, while the rest of the calendar runs without interruption. It looks like a gospel act and a classic rock legend and a professional wrestling promotion, all getting their nights without issue. But the biggest name Memphis rap has produced in his generation can't get through the front door. Pull back and look at the full picture. By every conventional measuring stick, Moneybagg Yo won. Grammy nomination, multiple Billboard #1 projects, Gangsta's Pain opening at the top of the Billboard 200, a performance fee that climbed from nothing to $200,000 a night. 8 children he can provide for in ways his mother never had the resources to provide for him. He cleared every hurdle that was supposed to represent making it out, and he cannot perform in his hometown. He cannot move through the streets he grew up on without armed security at his side. He cannot stop at the corner stores he used to frequent without a detail present. He cannot attend a funeral for someone from his own circle without calculating whether being seen there might be the last public appearance he ever makes. He lives in Atlanta now, watching Memphis from a managed distance. The city that forged everything about him is the city he has to actively avoid. That's not a success story with rough edges. That's a tragedy wearing platinum records as a disguise. What makes the FedEx Forum reaction so layered is that Moneybagg responded like someone genuinely blindsided by heartbreak, not like someone who saw this coming and braced for it. $300,000 committed, calling it the show he wanted most, saying it crushed him inside. This is a man who still loves Memphis and still wants to belong to it, and still puts it in his music like it's a place that claims him back. But a significant portion of Memphis' street infrastructure has made a determination that what happened in 2016 and everything that followed it cannot be undone. The betrayal multiplied over time. The DJ Vlad interview where he downplayed the violence that defined that era, missing Nusky's funeral, the car emoji, every moment where he opted for financial distance over the kind of personal accountability that the people around him treated as non-negotiable. Because in Memphis, loyalty isn't one value among many. No, it's the foundational architecture of the entire social structure. When the beef between Yo Gotti and OG Boo Dirty was active, it wasn't just two individuals in conflict. It was territorial, it was institutional, it carried weight that extended beyond both of them. When Moneybagg stepped across that line and took CMG's money, he didn't switch jobs, he defected. And defection in that world accumulates consequences that no budget can dissolve. The FedEx Forum situation proved that in the most direct way possible, he arrived with $300,000 of intention, a loaded guest list, and the genuine desire of a man trying to come home. And the city's infrastructure, the venue, the security math, the risk calculus looked at all of it and said the answer was still no. Not because of who he is as a person, but because the streets surrounding his name are volatile enough that the safety guarantee he tried to offer was a promise he genuinely had no ability to keep. The RICO indictments don't resolve this. Duke sitting in federal custody doesn't close the ledger that was opened at level 2 back in 2010. Organizations under that kind of pressure don't dissolve. They splinter and continue. And the threat Moneybagg faces doesn't require organized direction. It only requires someone affiliated with that world who sees him as a legitimate target worth moving on. Big 30 going public with everything made that threat more concentrated. Once it's common knowledge that Moneybagg was paying for protection, that he tried to phone in a funeral with a check, that the entire muscle arrangement collapsed publicly. Every person in Memphis with any connection to that ecosystem now has the full layout. They know he was exposed enough to need hired cover. They know that cover's gone. They know he's been using Atlanta as a buffer between himself and the fallout from a decision he made nearly a decade ago. All of that being in the open doesn't make him harder to reach, it makes him easier.